Okay. Hello. Welcome once again. I want to continue the reflection of yesterday as I've been thinking more about reflecting more on using this torus model, expanding it. So I want to reflect more and in general maybe say like we are reflecting on life itself, the flow of life, the way of life, and using this torus model flow, connecting these things to describe life and the flow of life and different ways of flowing through life, I guess. So again, there is like this expansion, a 0 point in the middle, expansion, contraction, back to it, 0 point. Let's maybe start with again, for now we are describing like one trajectory in this whole torus field. The field contains like many trajectories, many experiences in the same way. It's interesting because I was already also looking at that, how life in a way also like we jump out of this 0 point, and actually then we sort of like fragment ourselves into all these different trajectories, and then they flow and they may come back, creating a whole self once again back at the 0 point or into it and then being reborn. I wanted to point that out because it to me revealed how, and certainly I'm connecting that with the healing process of really collecting all these fragments of ourselves. Thing is, I'm touching how sometimes trauma is a good example of this. It's like a fragment of ourself gets trapped on its trajectory. It has an experience where it seems to get stuck. It cannot process that, and thus it cannot complete that experience. Even though, if we look at our own life, we may have a traumatic experience and we continue walking on. The thing is, this whole experience is not complete because the trauma is there. We can maybe then also think or ask the question, how do we actually complete that? Well, I would call that healing, making the whole trajectory whole, being able to actually process it, which I would also translate into being able to make sense of it. It ties in with meaning, it ties in with understanding what's actually truly happening in that experience, ties in with perhaps a or more perspectives to that experience, which then allows us to actually continue that flow, complete it, integrate the lesson, and actually add to our essence. Now, since we are touching in this in some way, I'm also noticing that this come also in some interesting imagery. I was having an imagery of like, if we look at this trajectory and then like we walk that trajectory, in my mind it came like a train that is going through a tunnel. It's like the one walking this trajectory. But this train, it can get stuck. I was thinking of this in terms of also resistance to the tunnel, resistance to the experience, resistance to life itself from that experience, trajectory or point, or seeing it very literal in my mind of like a train literally getting stuck in this tunnel, and then God also being funny and like getting a stick and pushing in the back of the tunnel, trying to get it to push it through that trajectory. In some way, this is sometimes what we can experience in life, sort of an energy giving, trying to give us a push that actually gets us to move through it. It doesn't have to be so forcing necessarily as literally pushing, because we can think of this in resistance. I was also literally thinking of like, maybe lube that train, maybe butter it in, maybe it really has to do with resistance, and it can really flow through that tunnel without having so much resistance, because it is so greasy. It just flows through like it's on ice or whatever. But again, there, when I think of ice, I also connect that with a grip on life. We want to have control of the situation. So yeah, I want to generalize this a bit. We can get stuck on this, especially this part also. It's like letting go and detaching. When we are too attached to the experience, to the trajectory itself, to the experience of it, we cannot come to completion, we cannot come to the essence. Especially this bottom part of the compression, it's like the experience is being stripped. All the little details that don't really matter. It's interesting using that wording, because at the 0 point there is no matter, yet there is value. Here it connects with that spirit, that essence. The experience itself is stripped. Here, like we're experiencing the matter, all the smells, all the colors, all the woo, and it is stripped of all that matter. And all we are left with is what truly matters. Of course, we can decide, this is up to us what truly matters. But if we connect this with this flow, what truly matters? If life keeps flowing through this thing, it's like something is materialized and then dematerialized. This brings me to, there are these things, this more spirit, this essence itself. It goes beyond matter. It's also like, I would call this whole thing real for sure, but this real collapses in on itself, and it feels like this, what is left over when everything has collapsed in on itself, feels more real than, not necessarily more, but spirit. And there can be a lot of value found in that. Don't want to necessarily go much deeper into that right now. In my thinking, I have been thinking of, well, there are different ways of this flow, how it can be experienced. Also, surely, like we have touched on now, like a completion of the flow, which seems to not always happen. Sometimes we get fragmented, which could also be seen maybe as like we are whole, we expand ourselves into all these different trajectories, all these different fragments. This could be all our different parts of life. I'm thinking of some example. It's like how often people may also be like, oh, these people, I'm experiencing life in such a way. These people or this environment. I want to keep things a bit general here, but sometimes not all those trajectories come to completion again, which can create a state of not being fully whole, or at least we're not feeling that. And want to differentiate then with how we can actually grow into life where we are always returning to ourselves, where we are coming home to ourselves wholly, where we leave from being whole. Because if we think about this, like, I'm not fully coming home to myself, yet the cycle starts again, but I'm not fully starting from a wholeness. So it becomes less. And then what happens? More fragmentation, perhaps, perhaps more healing, and actually more of us comes home. But this could explain like how we over time through these cycles may get more and more drained, more and more burnt out or whatever. But again, some kind of switch can happen to which we then start calling those pieces back. We're all over the place, we're fragmented over the place, a very traumatized individual. We can then call all these pieces home, also usually not at the same time. Usually takes a lot of focus and work bringing them home one by one. But then it is a cycle of becoming more and more whole. Therein, I want to touch on something. I'm already naming it coming home to ourself. It also has a feeling of meeting our creator. We are created and then we come back. Also, here is where we meet God. You can meet God on the whole journey as well, but this is like facing ourselves, coming home. And because I find it also interesting to think about this, something I touched on the earlier video, like a child who says, I'm going to find my own way, I'm leaving home. You go off into the world, you go explore the world. But sometimes how this child, or it can also do this from like, I know better than you, father. And then like not wanting to return home, because usually, not necessarily, but maybe that's the point, that we are to discover on this trajectory, like that we have to return. We don't have to, that's the thing. And if you don't want to, well, where do you go? Find a new home? Surely possible, but then you have to create a 0 point here, and it's also interesting. I want to touch on that later. But I feel I'm connecting this with like a trauma of like running away from home, and then um, maybe also shame and things like that of like, oh, I don't want to go and face my parents, I don't want to go and face God, because and then have to explain this whole experience. I will look stupid, but again, these are projections. The real father is loving, and usually this true connection, this true coming home is, it feels complete, but we may actually be in a state of fear, of fearing that, because we have but I feel that ties in with not fully understanding our journey itself, not fully having the experience of this in its right perspective, maybe. And maybe that is also what shapes why we are so afraid of going home to ourselves, to our Father, to God itself. Me talking about this is a bit touching that feeling which this flow may have, but at the same time, because within that is also how we can resolve that and actually get into. I feel I notice this within my life and beyond that even, but I leave home, uh, not running away from home. It's like going on an adventure. woohoo, explore the world, and then I'm really happy to come home with it and even tell my father, come home to myself as well and integrate that. It's also a process of integration, bringing it back into ourselves. Maybe this is like, no, I want more, I want more, I want more. But what more is actually bringing it in. This is also more, it is, well, more internal than external, I guess. And the thing is, if you really want more, well, maybe integrate it and go for the next cycle, and you have more. The quality of your next cycle can actually also bring more, because this essence has transformed, has upgraded. Now, I had an interesting connection here with yesterday. I already mentioned I was feeling this feeling of like flipping in on itself, this turning inside out. Well, yesterday I also came across a model which shows two toruses on top of each other, and I guess in the middle they sort of share a 0 point, and then it's more like a trajectory where you go through one and then through the other. And I'm really connecting that also with this feeling of where one is the inversion of the other. And it is that inversion is like flipping in on itself, inside out. The experience itself is, the world itself is flipping inside out as we move through this thing. Which again happens in the 0 point and only can happen when we truly come home. But I'm connecting this with justice, karma. Also, I would say the whole experience, we could then phrase that as experiencing it from the inside out is half of it. The other half is from the outside in. And that's why we move through one part and then through the other. And this is what we often connect with karma, or well, I would maybe say or call it now some kind of universal wholeness. But let's look at this in some more detail of how, let's say we're having an experience of life, we're walking a trajectory. Maybe this could even be your whole life itself. And we are having this experience from the perspective of me in my environment. And mostly this focus on how I am experiencing this. We go through life or through the whole trajectory, we come home, we die, we face our karma. Well, what does that look like? The inversion of it, where we move through the same life, but now we experience it from the perspective of the environment. And then from there, we experience us. This could be people, this could be environment. Feel that is and that is a really interesting thing to think about karma, because when we think of this deeper, how if we truly experience our own behavior from the perspective of that other, that is what really also will show us that other part of ourselves. True action, it also tied in a lot with the fear of actually going home. Maybe because we have, and maybe we know, like, I've been misbehaving. And then you're afraid of your father because he'll be like this. No, he doesn't do this. Karma is not a punishment. That's the thing. but we can experience it as such because, well, we may not want to experience our environment and how we have been behaving within that. But it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. If I am walking through life and I am a true blessing, I say true because surely the misbehaving people, the piece of shit, can also imagine that they are a blessing to their environment. But really, the thing is, this inversion thing doesn't care really what you believe. You will experience it from the other side. And to it depends on how we have walked life, whether this is horror, whether this is hell, or whether this is heaven, and whether it is. If we have been that blessing, that true blessing to the environment, and I'm starting to notice something like this happen in my own life currently, where maybe that's why I was feeling like I'm flipping inside out, and now it's like my environment is suddenly feeling to bless me. It's like starting to feel myself from the other side. You reap what you sow. Have you been sowing? You're gonna get it on this other side, in this other side of the torus. But why? And the thing is, I've gone through these experiences in my life. Surely it certainly felt like dying. Suddenly reflecting on my life and actually seeing, experiencing how I've been treating other people, feeling disgusted with myself, having to almost puke, seeing my own behavior, seeing how other people truly felt, how I made them feel in some way by my own behavior. It revealed wholeness and unity to me, how we are truly one. I would say it also helped me transform into a way of being, realizing now how we are all one. I would also phrase this as this other, this environment. It's also ourself. It's just the other self, but we're still one. And well, maybe also knowing we are going to experience it from the other side, it starts to change our behavior, how we behave, how we treat our environment, how we treat ourselves, this self in itself as well. It's a lot here. But I want to get to, because I notice within my own experience now, today, much more, I am actually, this thing I described before, where the person walks life and they experience it much more from their own perspective. I feel like I've opened that up into now experiencing both my perspective and experiencing my environment at the same time as one whole, and also in such a way that I also feel my own individual within that whole. But let's think about this for a second, how if you are truly feeling your environment, it's like also it has that feeling of walking with karma itself and instant karma. Especially for myself, it really has that feeling of like if I hurt you, I feel it within myself as well, within the bigger self that I feel in the moment itself. It feels because I've grown in a much more whole experience of life itself. But let's see how that actually it is operating from a different state of consciousness, from more unity, and this really changes how we then move through life itself, comparing it with that earlier, maybe much more selfish and egoistic state where you're truly only thinking about your own individual, but you're not aware of this other side, this environment. Here you will be much more loving. that doesn't mean you necessarily won't hurt or won't harm it, won't even destroy it. We are doing this consciously. And that means if you do destroy, if you do hurt, if you do harm, you are experiencing and conscious of it in the moment itself. That brings much more gravity to your own actions, to your own consciousness but it feels this talking about this is also heavy in my mind actually, but I feel there is also a lot more I want to add to these models, but touching it is definitely not easy. I've been thinking about, and maybe mentioning it in previous videos as well, of super states. And I notice within my own transformation, I seem to have grown into this. It is in a way a more unity consciousness, a higher state of consciousness, a more wholesome experience. This made me, it has that feeling of being 0 and 1 at the same time. Being someone and no one at the same time. We can also translate this into being home in the 0 point in our own center and at the same time being in our journey. It also means being on the journey while being at the 0 point at every point on the journey. I also translate this into being perfectly still while moving, and moving while being perfectly still. It is that integration of our masculine and feminine. It is that integration very much ties in with that Christ consciousness to me, and your left brain, right brain, all becoming one, learning to master this, learning to operate as one. But our movements, the quality and the control of it changes. I want to highlight this for now. When we think of this maybe in a very physical way, what this looks like, having control at every point during our movement, it means that when we are making a move, when we're walking through life or whatever, at any point we could like freeze and have control. It reminded me my walk during at like some kind of a kids game where you have to, it's like one person turns their back and then all the children, they walk or they run or something, and then when the person turns, they all have to freeze, and if you move, you're out. So perfect mastery is being able to be still, having that stillness within the movement while moving. It brings that, and let's maybe to clarify this, look at how I also used to go walk through life, especially in sports. I would often I strained my ankles so much, but it felt like because I was moving from an uncontrolled, it's like we can have a movement and just move with momentum, but you cannot just stop in the middle of the movement. You don't have that full stillness, that full control. And that's a different energy that also, especially if we want to make like fast switches or something, fast adjustments, maybe move around obstacles or a certain curvature into our movements. I'm talking about physical movements, but also consciousness itself. Being able to have that control, that stillness in the movement itself, being able to integrate that into a whole thing, also reflecting back on my own life, learning a lot about stillness, becoming still, learning to become still, learning to master that, learning a lot about movement, and then also the two together at once. The integration of that super state. But that then also made me think about again this torus, how it has that feeling of being home and on the journey at once, and it has that feeling of, well, the whole journey just lights up and you can see the whole journey and you can walk it in a much clearer way. But again, also your challenge is like in the next dimension where this darkness then is. There is always a next level of darkness in which you cannot see, in which you can actually grow. Mm. And I feel that is sufficient for now, actually, as we are already also 30 minutes in. I want to expand on this more, and I probably will, but for now I'm going to leave it here, so have a good one.